The fighting game community is no stranger to change. In its short history, the scene saw its roots planted in the arcades, transition over to home consoles, then eventually evolve into a legitimate online presence, which arguably prompted the community's most recent evolution, one which inhabits the world of professional gaming, or what is better known as esports. However, as the FGC was quickly moving towards bigger and better, be it with larger crowds, larger prize pools, and a larger spotlight, it all came to a screeching halt, as while the FGC is known to quickly embrace change, even they were not impervious to what everyone experienced in the last year.
In the days and weeks ahead, we expect to see the number of cases, the number of deaths, and the number of affected countries climb even higher. We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
As the world dealt with COVID-19, normal everyday living became even more so of a privilege. And as each community and society had to find a way to live in an age of a pandemic, a small yet determined community found itself evolving once again. Within the last 5 years alone, the fighting game community has been practically speedrunning through its esports introduction phase, a cycle which saw circuit schedules releasing, to the gathering in large venues competing for points and standings, eventually culminating at a final showdown between top competitors, crowning a champion, only for a new fighting game season to be announced, thus repeating the cycle. Albeit exciting for a small community to be finally getting its shine in the world of esports, it was only when the world seemingly stopped early last year that the FGC could finally take time to look around and reflect. While rushing to the top of the competitive mountain, the FGC failed to notice the need for some overshadowed, yet vital aspects in the community that needed to be addressed. Suffice it to say that the FGC's priorities changed quite dramatically during the pandemic, as we saw what was once the center focus on World Tour standings and tournament chatter turn to the need for clear communication between fighting game developers and fighting game consumers. While the pandemic imposed hardships on every fighting game in the landscape, there were a few that separated themselves from the pack by adapting to the times, with the help of clear messaging to their community through frequent communication, as well as overall improvements to the quality of their respective games. These select games have all had a different narrative up to this point. However, the one in which they all share was their perseverance to deliver improvements despite difficult times, a factor that the FGC certainly took note of. It is no secret that Tekken 7 arguably had its worst year in 2020 since launching in 2017. The game's third season brought to light many balance inconsistencies so severe that the development team were forced to issue an emergency patch only weeks prior to the Tekken World Tour final in December of 2019. However, matters only worsened after a poor showcase of the game at EVO Japan 2020, with the event clouded by more balance issues, predominantly the Leroy Smith launch debacle. Bandai Namco then proceeded to continuously need to balance patch the game, but never truly found its footing as it did in years prior. Moving forward to mid-year, Tekken 7's future looks somewhat bleak, as Bandai Namco was forced to cancel the Tekken World Tour for 2020, and factors like poor netcode, roster imbalance, and no indication for change seemed to spell the beginning of the end of the game's long-time reign at the top. However, in late September of 2020, Bandai Namco took the initiative to communicate with its fans and proceeded to explain the hardships of the pandemic and its effect on the game. However, after speaking to the delay of the game's fourth season, the development team addressed the poorly executed third season and decided to shift focus on improving Tekken 7's overall balance and netcode functionality, along with other quality of life changes, such as a Wi-Fi indicator and UI updates that had the community optimistic once again for the future of the game. Fast forward to mid-November of 2020, and the long-awaited fourth season finally launched. The reception for Season 4 was mostly positive, though it was soon noticed that while there were areas which were improved upon, other areas were still the same, predominantly the inconsistent netcode. Although the inconsistencies the game experienced were addressed, the game still failed to capture overall balance, something it was much closer to during the first two seasons of the game. However, achieving that feat with such a large and unique roster was always going to be a challenge. Tekken 7 then continued to move forward with its replacement for the Tekken World Tour 2020 circuit, doing so with an online tournament format, the Tekken Online Challenge Open Tournament Series, which crowned a winner in 10 different online regions for bragging rights. Finally, as we move to present day, as of late May 2021, Tekken 7 is in a somewhat of an odd position, as it is an older fighting game title, albeit with an improved reputation after a tough year in 2020, it remains to be seen where it goes from here. With its 4th season now complete, and the game reaching an impressive milestone of selling over 7 million copies worldwide, it is to be determined if a world tour will resume following the pandemic's end, or if Bandai Namco will shift focus to newer projects. Although Tekken 7 does not carry the same momentum it had in its early years, it should be credited for attempting to restore its reputation and to regain fans' goodwill by addressing pertinent issues, especially during a difficult time for its developers. The refocus on netcode and balance is something that could set a precedent for an upcoming Tekken project, and perhaps carry Bandai Namco to develop yet another stellar Tekken game in the future. Guilty Gear Strive is not out just yet. However, it is already safe to say it is one of the most talked about fighting games in the FGC this year. The game has perhaps the most potential of any fighting game in the landscape since the launch of Dragon Ball FighterZ to truly make a mainstream impact. Visually, the game is practically unrivaled in its overall presentation. Be it character models, animations, and stage design, Guilty Gear Strive is remarkable to say the least. The game features a balanced roster of new coming characters as well as legacy staples from previous Guilty Gear games, and perhaps most importantly, it is packaged with one of the most impressive implementations of rollback netcode to date. While the game was initially delayed out of 2020 and then later to the summer of 21 instead of the previously planned spring release date, when it comes to candid communication, Arc System Works were arguably second to none. In each step of the way, be it through interviews, developer blogs, and social media updates, the messaging with regards to Guilty Gear Strive has been transparent. Development has taken to heart the feedback from its community with regards to unfavorable changes such as user interface, the constant network issues, primarily with its art code system, and the switch to the pixel lobby system, which although was not completely reverted to its legacy Arc System Works lobby system, was in fact improved upon with later iterations. Arc System Works have also kept fans up to date with regards to why certain decisions have been made to elements of the game such as the Gatling system, the way in which tutorials are constructed, as well as aspects such as air dashing and the newly established wall break. To put it simply, Guilty Gear Strive is not meant to just be another game in the series, but rather it is meant to be a game that grows the series. It may also help the franchise reach levels of interest it has not garnered previously. The focus on superb presentation, excellent netcode, and less of a focus on complex mechanics are all factors that could see Guilty Gear Strive reach the level of success and mainstream popularity of other prominent titles such as Tekken and Street Fighter. With the game only being weeks away from its official release, it has some of the most crucial elements necessary for fighting game success already down pat. The jury is still out on how far Arc System Works will be able to take the game, and if it will be able to maintain casual interest along with appeasing legacy fans considering the game's significant change in direction. However, with continued polish, correct marketing, and increased momentum from a potential return of a world tour post-pandemic, Guilty Gear Strive may find itself ascending to a position which accompanies other fighting game mainstay titles. It is a well-known fact in the FGC that Street Fighter V had a long and polarizing journey since its initial launch in early 2016. The game has gone through too many ups and downs to keep track of. However, it could be said that in somewhat of an ironic fashion, while other fighting games its age are trending downwards, Street Fighter V is finding its peak late. Capcom is perhaps the only fighting game publisher this year who managed to turn an incredibly bad situation into arguably one of its best years to date, a feat made even more so impressive considering the awful timing of a global pandemic. Releasing the game's third expansion, Street Fighter V Champion Edition, after concluding its fourth season in the early months of 2020, it seemed as if Capcom was content with closing the book on the game and moving on to the presumed Street Fighter VI. However, after some time, fans received the news that the game will in fact go ahead with a fifth and final season, something which only became clearer as to why after the somewhat unceremonious exit of longtime Street Fighter producer Yoshinori Ono. In what seemed as a half-hearted attempt to buy time for the newly envisioned Street Fighter VI, Capcom's effort on Season 5 was something the FGC immediately took note of. For the first time in a long time, the communication between Capcom and its fanbase seemed to be restored in good faith. Capcom's fighting game division under a new leadership so far has paid early dividends, similar to Arc System Works and Guilty Gear Strive in the fact that they have been nothing but candid and transparent through the entire release of its 5th and final season. From the very beginning, the plans for the season were made known to fans, and through each seasonal update, they would not be shy divulging details as to how far development has progressed. It is not out of the question that one could consider Street Fighter V's 5th season as its best season, something that is often uncommon in older titles. Though it also should be stated that while Street Fighter V Champion Edition has gotten a lot right in its final development year, it has also failed to address the issue that has haunted the game since its launch, that being its inconsistent netcode. Unfortunately, while Capcom attempted to improve the netcode after removing a fan-made patch, which greatly managed to do so on the PC version of the game, it has not been able to capture the same results with its own efforts. On the competitive front, after trying to salvage what was left of the 2020 season by both moving to an online format and then moving the location of the final event from France to the Dominican Republic, Capcom decided to finally cancel Capcom Cup and Street Fighter League in January of 2021, and rather elected to resume the online format of the season, which will culminate in 2022. Despite the game not being for every single fighting game fan, Capcom's effort during the second half of 2020 and the first half of 2021 of making Street Fighter V the best version of itself, netcode notwithstanding, should still be commended. The game finally managed to eclipse its worldwide sales to a total of 5 million copies, and if anything, the new approach of Capcom's fighting game division, with its execution of Street Fighter V's final season, should at least lead to some optimism with regards to the upcoming Street Fighter VI. As some fighting games in the landscape made the most of their situations during the pandemic, other games unfortunately were not able to hold on to the same momentum they had prior to it for various reasons. Although it was a case-by-case basis, it is without question that certain games struggle to find their footing, be it early on, late, and for some even at all. As we look forward to the hopeful end of the pandemic, it will be interesting to see where these fighting game titles go from here, and if they are able to rebound and learn from a difficult year, or if they will look to close the chapter on one and perhaps open a new chapter on another. Being halfway through its third season and wanting to avoid any loss of momentum from its 2019 competitive run, a global pandemic was most certainly not in the plans for Dragon Ball FighterZ. It could be argued that out of the major 4 fighting games in the landscape, Dragon Ball FighterZ is probably the one giant that struggled the most in the past year. A true unfortunate predicament to be in, considering the game from a balance and gameplay standpoint was the best it has ever been since launching in 2018. Its expansive roster only furthered the Dragon Ball brand, and with a pretty favorable cast of characters set to join the game in Season 3, Dragon Ball FighterZ was set up for yet another successful year. However, after making the decision to cancel the Dragon Ball FighterZ World Tour in early July of 2020, the game, similar to many others, decided to shift focus to the online competitive space, an area in which the game struggles immensely considering its lack of rollback netcode. The replacement of its traditional World Tour came by way of the Dragon Ball FighterZ National Championship, an online tournament decided through qualifications based by various regions. Although the competition did not have the same impact as its normal competitive circuit, it still made for a quality product for the spectators of the game. Although there was not much back and forth from the development team and the community, Dragon Ball FighterZ did manage to complete its Season 3 pass. However, there are certain questions that have yet to be answered. Will the game continue moving forward with more seasons in its current form, or will it explore the possibility of another iteration in the series? Dragon Ball FighterZ in a way defied expectations, especially considering only being just over 3 years old. The game managed to garner enough interest based on its popular intellectual property, explosive gameplay, and stellar visuals, and as of late May 2021, it has already sold more than 6 million copies worldwide, and has done so impressively even with the lack of a proper netcode solution. Considering Bandai Namco has already shut down the idea of incorporating rollback netcode into the current Dragon Ball FighterZ, it remains to be seen if perhaps the game is looking to return with a sequel that does. Suffice it to say that if a future project is in the works, the lessons learned from the original, along with rollback netcode, will most definitely insert Dragon Ball FighterZ right back into place as one of the premier fighting game titles in the landscape. Similar to most NetherRealm Studio titles, the FGC knows what Mortal Kombat 11 Ultimate is. It is an extremely popular fighting game that generates a lot of interest from the casual market due to its immensely popular IP, more specifically in the West. However, it could be said that when it came to the year 2020, Mortal Kombat 11 stole the show. It never showed sign of slowing down due to the pandemic and continued to support the game through updates, which eventually saw the completion of its second combat pack, which then prompted its presumed final iteration, Mortal Kombat 11 Ultimate, in November of 2020, only 5 months apart from its previous Aftermath expansion. The game has done a tremendous job of appealing to its fanbase with additions of popular pop culture characters, as well as the return of some fan favorites, crossplay between rival consoles, as well as the patented Mortal Kombat action it has demonstrated also well in the past. From an FGC perspective, while the game offers some interesting and unique ideas mechanically, it is still plagued by animations and an overall presentation that leaves much to be desired. Though its netcode is still impressive, and it certainly meets its mark with roster diversity. While it had a fantastic award-winning second half of the year 2020, in the first half of the year 2021, it is beginning to show signs of the NetherRealm Studio development cycle the FGC knows all too well. It is unlikely to reach a third year of continued support, as the game will likely be replaced by a new title from the studio, as they have done just that so many times in the past. Currently, the game is moving along with its online version of its professional circuit, the Mortal Kombat 11 Pro competition, and it is presumed that at its culmination, the rumbling for a new NRS title will be afoot. Although there is often a disconnect from the FGC with regards to many of NetherRealm Studios' titles, the support for Mortal Kombat 11 in what has only just been over 2 years cannot be dismissed, as the game has sold over 8 million copies worldwide. It is not known yet what NetherRealm Studios has in store for its fans with its presumed upcoming project. However, if the past is any indication, it will most likely be something both the FGC and the casual fandom may come to enjoy. In what has been a combination of extreme bad luck, along with poor decision making in just what has been over 14 months since its North American release, Granblue Fantasy Versus unfortunately never stood a chance. Although the game is derived from an extremely popular license in Granblue Fantasy, it had failed to truly capture a widespread interest in the West. Its string of bad luck began when it failed to get the exposure it needed during its honeymoon period, as its professional circuit was cancelled as part of the Arc World Tour 2020 in the very same month the game launched. To make matters worse, the game's poor netcode solution did not leave many options for online tournament organizers, and despite the event eventually getting cancelled for reasons unrelated to the pandemic, Granblue Fantasy Versus was not even a consideration for EVO Online 2020. Competitive plans notwithstanding, Cygames and Arc System Works did focus on continually building onto the game by introducing a second season pass, as well as a couple of battle passes which expanded the game's roster, customization options, and added to its single-player campaign. With only one character set to be revealed later this summer, the game found itself in a good place content-wise, and while it didn't hit a home run with every single edition, its DLC efforts have been mostly favorable. As it currently stands, Granblue Fantasy Versus is in a precarious position. While it has sold over 500,000 copies worldwide, it does not have nearly the same resonance with fans in the West as it does in the East, specifically in Japan and Southeast Asia. Looking on the bright side, the game did in fact manage to run a smaller capacity regional online circuit for its World Tour replacement, and its gameplay has done a credible job of attracting newcomers to the fighting game, considering it implements simpler controls, impressive visuals, and original offline modes which include an RPG campaign-like story mode. However, as we near the home stretch of Granblue Fantasy Versus second season pass, we may get a clearer picture of where the game exactly fits in the FGC. It is without question that the game is held back by its lack of solid netcode, as well as a higher pricing model than many other games in the landscape. With multiple upcoming fighting games to rival it that do incorporate rollback netcode, and Granblue Fantasy Versus' own director refusing to commit to the idea, the game will either have to find a way to reinvent itself or concede its position in the FGC. Power Rangers Battle for the Grid had a quiet yet consistent year in the fighting game landscape. It may not have broken into the mainstream, or generated newsworthy headlines like some of the other fighting games in the past 12 months. However, it quietly completed its third season pass, as well as added 2 unique guest characters from the mobile version of the game to its console counterpart. The game is still held by its cornerstones of fun versus style gameplay, rollback netcode, and something no other fighting game can claim for itself: cross-platform play across the board. Its only shortcoming has come by way of not truly grabbing onto the wider audience in the FGC, however it is still very much consistent in smaller circles. The game's professional circuit, the Power Rangers Battle for the Grid League, similar to others, had to switch from offline to online competitions, though have managed to implement a unique way of working with local tournament organizers around the world as designated sanctioned events for its Pro Tour. It is currently unknown if the game is planning continued development, however, albeit quiet, Power Rangers Battle for the Grid put itself in a position to handle the global pandemic better than most, and although it may not receive an enormous spotlight, it is one that has not dimmed once the entire year. Samurai Shodown can either be seen as glass half empty or glass half full. The game continues its tradition of impeccable unique gameplay, especially for the current fighting game era. It has one of the best rosters in fighting games, which include favorable experiments with guest characters, and lastly it has made its way over to the 9th console generation with the Xbox Series family of consoles. However, the game has also been home to 2 major shortcomings. The first is its use of delay-based netcode, which has been reported to cause many issues in various regions, and the other is its lack of Steam support, a platform which holds a large portion of the SNK audience. Although as of recently, SNK finally managed to address one of its shortcomings as they announced that a Steam version of the game will be coming later in the summer of 2021. Approaching 2 full years since its North American release, Samurai Shodown has done a lot right, and it is not far from getting it all right. Competitively, its planned professional SNK sponsored circuit, in the form of the Neo Geo World Tour, was cancelled due to the global pandemic, and it is to be seen if it's resurrected upon the return to offline events. With SNK positioning its fighting game titles to return to the fold of competitions in the FGC, it remains to be seen if the implementation of rollback netcode to Samurai Shodown can come in the near future, something which will truly maximize the game's potential. After finally getting its due with a professional circuit announcement nearly 18 months after the game's release, Soulcalibur VI had to have a global pandemic stop its fleeting momentum. Although it has somewhat been in the shadow of its Bandai Namco developed counterpart in Tekken 7, Soulcalibur VI has done a fairly nice job of moving forward during a tough year. The game completed its second season pass, which includes favorable additions to its roster and customization options, as well as provided some balance changes to maintain newfound interest, as well as help rejuvenate the game to a degree. And despite it not being the traditional game Soulcalibur fans are accustomed to, it still has much to offer, especially with more modernized gameplay. As it did with Tekken 7, Bandai Namco elected to change the format of the game's World Tour and ran tournaments online specified by region. However, considering the game's lack of rollback netcode, similar to many other games in the landscape, the tournaments came and went with no real impact. It is no secret which child is the golden one in the Bandai Namco family of games. In approaching 3 years since its North American release, the chatter for continued development for Soulcalibur VI has been quiet, especially after the completion of its second season pass. As we currently stand, and considering the game's age, it is unlikely to see a scenario in which Soulcalibur VI gets another shot at a world tour. And as unfortunate as it is, it may very well become the game that deserved its flowers, but due to wrong place, wrong time, and bad luck, never got them. As the longest reigning game in the FGC currently, Skullgirls has been a part of many narratives and storylines in the last 9 years. However, none of them have been as much of a roller coaster ride as the one which continued to cloud the game within the last 12 months. After finally getting its chance to grace the EVO Grand Stage, albeit figuratively with an invite to EVO Online 2020 in what was supposed to be a redemption-filled storyline after the game's failure to capture that moment in 2013 was taken away from it after the event's cancellation. To make matters worse, the game had an event-filled summer as it saw saw its lead developer wrapped up in multiple controversies online, which eventually led to the disbandment of Lab Zero Games. However, fast forwarding a few months, and the game has adopted a new studio and Future Club comprised of former Lab Zero Games staff, and in even more of a surprising turn, the announcement of the game's first ever season pass. While it did not close a chapter on 2020 on the greatest of notes, the first half of 2021 has certainly returned some normalcy to Skullgirls' second Encore. The game continues to sport its chaotic versus style gameplay, and still incorporates rollback netcode. However, it hasn't been completely smooth sailing since turning over the calendar year. Despite the excitement of a new season pass, as well as the addition of new characters, the game has been the subject of criticism with the pricing model of the new season, as well as introducing many endgame issues, which are quite uncharacteristic, some which include frequent gameplay bugs, network instability, and odd roster balancing choices. However, considering the game is resuming development under a new studio, a transition period should be expected. Competitively, the game has also made strides by announcing the Skullgirls Championship Series, which will be held online and use a point system with qualifiers, eventually culminating with a final championship to be held at the end of the year. Even in its 9th year post-launch, the game continues to surprise the FGC, and while it had a bit of a rocky path to get there, it's the community-led efforts that have carried Skullgirls' second Encore to still being a relevant fighting game title in 2021. If there was a hidden gem in the FGC in 2021, it was most certainly Them's Fighting Herds. The game is filled with innovation, from its tutorial structure, its offline modes, and it is already ahead of the curve with the use of rollback netcode. Although the game is limited in its roster size, it has recently upgraded to its 2.0 phase and has introduced a brand new original character, along with some presentation polish and balance changes. As unfortunate as it is, it was unable to showcase itself at EVO Online 2020 due to the event's cancellation. However, the game did run its own competitive event in the Grand Stampede, and is set up for yet another great competitive year with the Stampede Tournament Circuit, which is set to culminate at the end of 2021. The game is only truly held back by not being available on more platforms outside of PC, as well as the stigma labeled against it as a My Little Pony fighting game, as opposed to the traditional model of human or humanoid type characters. In an era of fighting games which have struggled to find a balance of simplicity for the sake of maintaining a newcomer's retention, yet still be intricate enough for the sake of a veteran's search for depth, Them's Fighting Herds arguably toes that line better than any other fighting game currently available. As the game continues to build upon itself, and perhaps expand to various other platforms, it may in fact find itself being heralded by more than just a small dedicated circle, and perhaps even recognized by wider ones in the FGC. After being dormant for nearly an entire year since first showcasing its in-development announcement trailer, the King of Fighters 15 has made its presence known in 2021. SNK's promotion of the game has included weekly trailers which are assumed to continue up until the release of the game. While there is still not much known about the game, the King of Fighters fans can anticipate yet another traditional 1 vs 1 character battle incorporating a team of 3. It has also become apparent with its latest character trailers that many of its legacy fighters from older titles have made their return. Although it is still too early to judge, there have been some graphical inconsistencies with the character models, as well as the overall graphical fidelity of the game, which includes certain animations and battle effects on screen, which are in need for more polish. A big question that has yet to be answered with the King of Fighters 15, however, has been with its netcode. While its development team has acknowledged the role in which rollback netcode has played in the FGC within the last year, they have not completely committed to the idea of its implementation as of yet. The King of Fighters 15 has a lot of potential to play an important role in the fighting game landscape moving forward. It is to be seen if it will listen to early community feedback and address the inconsistencies and questions its community is currently providing. However, with still plenty of time left, the King of Fighters 15 may very well become a fighting game mainstay for the foreseeable future. After its trademark renewed in October of 2020, there were rumblings of a new Melty Blood fighting game planned in the future. However, it wasn't until the official announcement of Melty Blood type Lumina that fans finally believed that the long-awaited return of the franchise was near. Melty Blood type Lumina is set to launch at the end of this year, and it will act as a companion to the upcoming Tsukihime, A Piece of Blue Glass Moon. Considering the game has made it clear it will not be a direct sequel to the beloved Melty Blood actress again current code, it should be expected to see fewer returning characters in the game, at least for the time being. The few early details we are aware of is its inclusion of many characters from the upcoming Tsukihime remake, as well as its planned use of rollback netcode. Although still quite early, the anticipation for the game has been growing around the FGC, and it remains to be seen if the game will live up to the expectations set by its predecessor, especially considering over 10 years have passed since its last iteration. The last 12 months in the FGC have been unprecedented. It was a year filled with on-the-fly adjustments, a need for perspective change, and a push for innovation, albeit the difficult times. Although the narrative surrounding rollback netcode, remote ways of competing, and developer communication somewhat dominated the year as primary headlines, the secondary and tertiary headlines in the FGC were still observed closely, and could definitely affect the future of the fighting game landscape moving forward. Like much of the world, the FGC is looking to return to its normal routine from before the global pandemic. And although we are not quite there just yet, fighting game normalcy is looking at a possible return to form in the second half of 2021. Although the circumstances were less than ideal, the FGC has grown a lot in the past 12 months. However, it was not the type of numerical growth it is accustomed to. The refocus on developer-to-player communication, the rise in awareness for substantial factors such as the need for rollback netcode, as well as the creative growth seen by its increased content creation avenues, were all areas the FGC greatly improved upon. As the competitive landscape returns to a traditional offline home, it remains to be seen if these newly introduced elements remain at the forefront in the FGC, or if they will lose steam when the continued quest for esports prominence returns. In closing, regardless of how the FGC handles the next 12 months, it should be proud with how it handled the last 12 months. There were a few hiccups along the way, and it wasn't always pretty. And while some developers and games shine brighter than others, the FGC most certainly rebounded. It is without a doubt that once again, a small community dedicated to a small subgenre in the giant world of gaming made significant strides in becoming arguably the best community in gaming, a title that it may very well already own.